The first thing to hit the floor was a glass display case filled with hand-stitched pocket squares, ivory, slate blue, and deep burgundy. Each one folded with a kind of precision that only comes from decades of the same careful hands doing the same careful work. It did not simply fall. It was swept off the counter by the arm of a man who had long since stopped believing that his anger had consequences. The case shattered against the hardwood, and the squares scattered across the floor, like petals shaken loose from something that had taken a very long time to grow. Then a standing rack of finished garments went next. Suits and dresses in paper-thin protective covers swaying and crashing sideways, hangers clattering against each other in a sound that filled the small shop completely. A work table covered in measuring tape, chalk, and pinned fabric panels was next, everything sliding to the ground in one long sweep. Spools of thread rolled in every direction, burgundy, black, cream, forest green, spinning across the dark wood floor and coming to rest in the corners like something that had simply given up. By the time Marcus Delaney turned to leave, the interior of Stitch and Grace looked like something had moved through it with intention. And through all of it, Zora Bloom said nothing. She stood at the back of the shop with both hands loose at her sides, watching him go. Her expression was not anger. It was not even hurt. It was something quieter than both of those things, a stillness so complete that it seemed to come from somewhere inside her that Marcus could not touch and did not understand. That stillness followed him out through the door and down the front steps and into the Atlanta morning, and stayed with him the entire drive back to his office tower, in a way that nothing had stayed with him in years. Marcus Delaney was 42 years old and had spent the last 13 years doing to Atlanta's skyline what very few people had the stomach to do, reshaping from the inside out, block by block, deal by deal, without apology and without pause. He did not simply acquire properties. He displaced entire ecosystems, old barbershops that had cut the same family's hair for 2 generations, corner groceries, neighborhood diners with a waitstaff near your order before you sat down. All of it gave way eventually to towers bearing his company's name across the lobby wall, in brushed steel. People in his industry called him relentless. His investors called him indispensable. Nobody called him warm. He had built his entire reputation on the understanding that sentiment was not a business strategy, and he had never once encountered a situation that gave him reason to question that. Delaney Square was supposed to be his defining project, a mixed-use development in the heart of Midtown Atlanta, ground-level retail anchored by premium tenants, luxury residential above, a rooftop green space that the city's planning commission had already praised publicly. The project had taken 5 years to design, and 3 years to assemble parcel by parcel. Every property on that block had been purchased, every owner negotiated out, every contract finalized and signed, except one. Stitch and Grace sat on the south corner of the block, like something that had simply decided not to participate. It was a narrow 2-story building with a dark green awning, a hand-lettered sign above the door, and a front window that displayed a rotating selection of the shop's finest finished work. A beaded evening gown one month, a perfectly structured men's suit the next. The kind of window that made people stop on the sidewalk without knowing exactly why. Inside, every surface told you that someone had been doing this for a very long time and had no intention of stopping. Marcus had sent 4 offer letters before he ever set foot inside. Market value first, then 1.5 times that, then double, then a number that would have allowed Zora Bloom to open a new shop anywhere in the city, hire a full staff, and still have enough left over to retire comfortably before she turned 50. Each time, she declined, not with a counteroffer, not through a lawyer, with a handwritten note on plain cream stationery, thanking him for his interest and explaining that the shop was not available. His legal team had been direct with him. Construction could not break ground until that parcel was secured. Every week of delay was costing his investors real money and costing him real credibility with the city. He had already pushed the groundbreaking back twice. And so Marcus decided to go himself. In his experience, resistance that persisted simply had not yet been confronted with enough directness. When he stepped through the door of Stitch and Grace on a Wednesday morning, he was not prepared for what it felt like inside. The space was small, barely 900 square feet, but it had the quality of a place that knew exactly what it was. Bolts of fabric lined one full wall in careful order by weight and color. A long work table ran down the center of the room, its surface covering the organized evidence of several projects in progress. Pin patterns, chalk markings, a half-finished hem held in place by a row of silver pins. The smell was warm and specific. Cotton and cedar and something faintly metallic from the pins and needles. A dress form near the window wore a half-constructed evening jacket in deep charcoal wool, its lapels basted into shape with long white stitches. For just a moment, standing in the doorway, something in Marcus's chest shifted slightly. A memory tried to surface. His father's hands, a Sunday morning, a white dress shirt being pressed on an ironing board while a radio played in the next room. He pushed it down. He placed the envelope on the counter and slid it toward her. Inside was a contract. The number on the final page was the highest he had ever offered anyone. "Name your figure," he said. "Whatever makes this right for you. I just need this resolved." Zora looked at the envelope. Then she looked at him. She was 36 years old, with deep brown skin and dark eyes, and a particular kind of calm that comes not from indifference, but from having made a decision a long time ago and having lived inside it long enough to be certain. Her locks were wrapped and pinned. She wore a dark apron with 2 front pockets and a measuring tape draped across her shoulders the way other people wear scarves. "I appreciate that," she said, "but this shop is not for sale." He told her everything has a price. She told him not this one. Her voice was level and unhurried. "My grandmother built this place with her own hands," she said. "She sewed her first client's wedding dress on that table right there. She spent 40 years in this shop. She knew every person who walked through that door by name, and she knew what they needed before they asked. This is not a property to me. This is everything she left behind. It is the only version of her I still have." Marcus felt the composure he had walked in with beginning to thin at the edges. "Your grandmother is gone," he said, and even as he said it, he heard how it landed in the room. "The neighborhood is changing with or without your participation. I am offering you the chance to walk away with enough to build something entirely new." "I did not want something new," Zora said quietly. "I want this." That was the moment something broke loose in him. It was not one feeling. It was months of accumulated pressure arriving all at once. Investors sending pointed weekly emails, contractors sitting idle on hold, city permits with expiration clocks running down. He thought about every obstacle that had ever stood between him and what he was building, and how every single one of them had eventually moved. His arm swept across the work table before he had fully decided to move it. The glass display case went first, then the garment rack, then the table itself. He kept going until the only sound in the shop was a spool of burgundy thread, still spinning slowly in the corner, and his own breathing coming harder than he expected. Zora knelt down. She did not raise her voice. She did not call after him. She simply began carefully lifting the fallen garments from the floor one at a time, smoothing each one before setting aside, checking for damage with the focused attention of someone who intended to keep working, who had already decided that whatever had just happened was not the end of anything. Marcus stood in the doorway and watched her for a long moment. Then he walked out. He was 4 blocks away before his hand stopped shaking on the steering wheel. If that silence stayed with you, stay with this story. Subscribe to Echoed True Stories and find out what Marcus is about to discover. He told himself on the drive to the hospital that Stitch and Grace was finished business. By the end of the week, his lawyers would send a formal notice. Zora Bloom would come to understand, the way everyone eventually did, that holding out served no one. He had seen it before. People who confused loyalty with strategy, who gripped things that no longer served them because releasing them felt like a betrayal of something they could not name. They always came around. It was only a matter of time and the right kind of pressure. Marcus told himself this the whole drive over. He visited his father every Tuesday and Thursday without exception. It had become one of the few fixed points in his week over the past 4 months, ever since Raymond Delaney had come closer to dying than Marcus had ever let himself fully sit with. Raymond was 70 years old, precise, principled, and quietly stubborn in a way that Marcus had inherited entirely and never once acknowledged. He had been in that hospital long enough that the nurses greeted him by name and knew he preferred the blinds tilted to let in the afternoon light, but not the direct sun. The illness had arrived without warning and moved fast. His physicians had been plain about it. without a very specific medical procedure, and without a donor who matched a narrow and highly particular set of biological criteria, Raymond would not survive the year. Marcus had brought in specialists from 4 cities. He had paid for every test that money could access. He had quietly arranged for every willing member of their family to be screened. None of them were compatible. The search expanded from there: medical networks, hospital volunteer registries, quiet outreach through channels Marcus did not discuss in meetings or mention in any conversation outside of the necessary ones. For nearly a month, nothing. And then someone came forward. Anonymous. A perfect match. The procedure was performed, and it succeeded. Raymond recovered steadily over the following weeks, and then completely. The identity of the donor remained sealed. That donor had made one request, clear, firm, and committed to in writing, that Raymond and his family never be told who she was. She had refused every form of compensation. She did not want to be found. She did not want acknowledgement of any kind. Raymond spoke about this person the way people speak about things that have rearranged them from the inside. Not constantly, but with a specific quality of tenderness whenever the subject arose naturally in conversation. Someone decided I was worth saving, he would say, and they didn't stay long enough to hear thank you. Marcus had always found it moving in a way he did not entirely have language for. He had also, privately, spent considerable effort trying to identify who that person was. Hospital administrators, records requests through his legal team, every quiet avenue available to a man with his resources and his patience. Each time he had come up empty. The donor had been thorough about her anonymity in a way that suggested she had thought carefully about it. That Wednesday evening, he arrived at the hospital later than usual. Raymond was already asleep, his reading glasses still on, a paperback novel open face down on the blanket beside him. Marcus sat in the chair next to the bed and looked at his father in the low light and tried not to think about the tailor shop. He was not succeeding. The image of Zora on that floor came back to him with an insistence that felt almost physical, the way she had lifted each garment carefully, smoothed it, set aside, the way she had not looked at him when she did it, as if his presence in the room had already become irrelevant. He had destroyed things before in his career, deals, partnerships, structures that stood in his way. He had never felt afterward the way he felt right now, sitting in this quiet room, hands resting still in his lap, not able to name what was sitting in his chest. A nurse came in without disturbing Raymond, made a note in the chart on the bedside desk, and set down a manila folder before stepping quietly back out. Marcus glanced at it without intention. Medical files did not interest him. He looked away. Then something pulled his attention back. The folder had shifted slightly on the desk, and part of it lay open. He could see it was a follow-up document from the donor procedure, administrative in nature, a routine post-case file clipped together with a standard identity verification form. There was a photograph attached at the back. A small one, the kind taken for official records, direct, clear, unsmiling. Marcus leaned forward. He recognized her immediately. The deep brown skin, the dark, steady eyes, the particular quality of stillness in her expression, the same stillness he had been unable to shake all day. Zora Bloom. He sat back in the chair, so hard the legs scraped against the tile floor. Raymond shifted slightly in the bed and then settled. Marcus stared at the ceiling. The fluorescent light above him hummed in the silence of the room, and he stayed very still inside that sound for a long time. When the nurse returned, he asked her carefully and professionally to explain what that document was. She hesitated. Then she told him. The photograph was part of a standard post-procedure identity file. The donor had been a woman who came to the hospital on a separate personal errand. She had overheard a member of the medical staff discussing a patient with an unusual and specific compatibility need. The hospital had been running a quiet voluntary screening program at the time, open to any willing participant, widely considered a long shot. Very few people had come forward for it. This woman had. The odds of a match, the nurse said, were extremely small. Against all reasonable probability, she was perfect. She agreed to the procedure within the same week. She refused every form of compensation offered to her. Her only condition, held to firmly and put in writing, was that the patient and the patient's family never be told who she was. She said the nurse offered almost gently, that she didn't want gratitude. She just wanted someone to live. Marcus sat in that hospital room for a long time after the nurse left. He thought about the day the call came that a donor had been found, how he had walked to the parking garage alone and pressed his back against the concrete wall and let himself come apart with relief in a way he had not allowed since he was a boy. He thought about what was happening on the other side of the city on that same day. A woman going through a medical procedure for a stranger she had never met, then going home, then coming the next morning and opening her shop and laying out her tools and beginning to work. He thought about the garments on the floor. He thought about the way she smoothed each one before setting it aside. The guilt arrived slowly at first, the way light changes before you notice it has changed. Then all at once, the way it does when you've been refusing to look at something directly and it finally turns to face you. Do not go anywhere. Subscribe to Echoed True Stories, because what Marcus does next will either define him or undo him completely. He did not call ahead. He did not send a representative or have his assistant draft a message or ask his lawyers to prepare anything. Those were the instruments of a version of himself he was not sure he could inhabit right now and was not sure he deserved to. He drove back to the shop the next morning and parked across the street and sat with the engine off for several minutes before he got out. The green awning was already down. The front door was propped open. Through the window, he could see her moving inside. He crossed the street. Zora was at the work table when he came through the door. She had cleared the debris from the day before. The shattered display case was gone. The spools were back in their places along the side shelf. The garment rack had been righted and the recovered pieces rehung. She was bent over a pinned piece of fabric, making a chalk mark along a seam line with the steady hand of someone who had been doing this long enough that precision had become automatic. The shop smelled exactly as it had the morning before. Warm, purposeful, specific. She looked up when he came in. Her expression did not change much. She set the chalk down and waited. Marcus had prepared something on the drive over. A structured explanation, what he had seen, how he had seen it, what it meant. A clear and genuine apology. A concrete plan for how to make it right. He was skilled at structured conversations. They gave him a way to manage outcomes, even in difficult rooms. He lost the structure before he said 10 words. I was at the hospital last night, he said. My father's hospital. He stopped, looked at the floor, started again. There was a file on the desk. A donor file. I saw your photograph. Zora straightened slowly. She did not look shocked. She looked the way people look when something they've been bracing for, quietly, without admitting it, finally arrives. She set both hands flat on the work table and was still for a moment. Then she looked toward the front window. I wasn't supposed to see it, Marcus said. It was an accident. But I need you to understand, I know what you did, and I know what I did in this shop yesterday. And I cannot put those two things in the same sentence without seeing myself clearly for what I was. Zora kept her eyes on the window for another moment. Then she looked back at him. You didn't know, she said. No, but that doesn't fix it. She agreed that it didn't. He told her he would rebuild everything. Every display case, every damaged garment, every piece of equipment, every surface. He would pay well beyond the actual cost of the damage. He told her he had already called his lead architect that morning and that the footprint of Delaney Square was being revised, that Stitch and Grace was no longer part of the acquisition. The design would be restructured around it. He didn't have all the answers yet on how the numbers would resolve, but he would carry whatever the cost was himself before he would ask her to move. Zora listened to all of it without interrupting. Then she said, I don't want your money. He started to respond. She held up one hand. Not sharply, just firmly, the way you hold up a hand when you need someone to hear the next thing without the noise of their intentions getting in the way. I saved your father because someone needed saving, she said, not because of who he was to you. I didn't know his name when I volunteered. I didn't know anything about him except that the need was real and I was in a position to answer it. That is the only reason. She paused and let that settle. What you did in this shop was wrong. But I don't need compensation. I don't need a gesture. I just need you to leave this place alone. Marcus left, and then he did something that would have genuinely bewildered anyone who had worked alongside him over the past decade. He sat in his car in front of the shop for a while, not making calls, not sending messages, just sitting. Then he drove to his office and called his lead architect and told him the Delaney Square footprint was being revised effective immediately. The Stitch and Grace parcel was out of the acquisition permanently. The design team would need to restructure the entire south end of the plaza around it. His legal team told him what it would cost. His investors requested an emergency call and asked pointed questions for 40 minutes. He answered every one of them the same way. It is already decided. No elaboration, no negotiation, no invitation to revisit it. He said it, and he meant it, and he hung up. Marcus Delaney had built his entire professional identity on being the most decisive person in any room he entered. He made decisions quickly, and he stood inside them without apology. He did not explain himself to people who questioned him. These were not postures. They were convictions, deeply held beliefs about what it meant to lead and what strength actually required. But sitting in his car outside a tailor shop on a Wednesday morning, thinking about a woman who had walked into a hospital for a stranger and walked back out without telling a single person, he understood for the first time that decisiveness without conscience was not strength. It was just momentum. And momentum without direction destroys things. He had proven that himself one day earlier on a hardwood floor covered in scattered thread. 6 months later, Delaney Square opened on a clear Thursday morning in early October. The towers were everything the renderings had promised. The ground-level storefronts had filled with tenants before summer ended. The courtyard was exactly as the landscape architects had designed it. Wide, unhurried, with a long water feature running down the center and bronze planters overflowing with ornamental grasses that moved in the morning wind. Journalists photographed the skyline from across the expressway and ran pieces, calling the development a landmark of New Atlanta. The mayor attended the ribbon cutting. The reservations at the Anchor restaurant were booked 3 weeks out before the doors opened. And right at the center of it all, on the south end of the plaza where the courtyard curved gently inward, stood one narrow 2-story building with a dark green awning and a hand-lettered sign, and a front door propped open to let in the October air. The architects had redesigned the entire south corridor around it. They had reoriented the pedestrian flow so that the main walkway bent naturally toward the shop's entrance, drawing foot traffic past the front window the way a good street does. Not by force, but by invitation. The plaza did not merely accommodate Stitch and Grace. It curved around it, the way a river bends around something that has always been there and intends to remain. Several architecture critics noted the design choice in their coverage of the opening. One called it an unusual decision. Another described it as the most honest thing about the project. A design journal ran a photograph of the plaza from above, all that glass and steel arranged in a deliberate arc around one small green awning, and titled the image simply, "The Center." Marcus never explained it in any interview. On opening morning, he walked the courtyard alone before the public arrived, coffee in hand, moving slowly through the space he had spent 6 years building toward. He stopped outside the green awning. Through the front window, he could see Zora inside, arranging the display. A charcoal will blaze on the dress form, a folded length of deep burgundy fabric on the table, her movements unhurried and certain. She had not seen him. He kept walking. Raymond arrived mid-morning, moving carefully on Marcus's arm the way he had moved since his recovery, with the deliberate attention of a man who had learned not to take steps for granted. He wore a dark coat and the good shoes he reserved for occasions he considered worth dressing for. He had been asking about the development for months, following the news coverage with the particular interest of a father watching his son build something that will outlast both of them. They walked the full courtyard together. Raymond asked about the fountain. He read the menus posted beside the restaurant doors. He paused at the bronze planters and touched one of the grasses with 2 fingers. The way he touched things he found well made. He was quiet in the way he became when something pleased him, and he did not want to perform the feeling. When they reached Stitch and Grace, Marcus held the door. He had told Raymond some of the story in the weeks before the opening. Not all of it. Not the full account of the morning in the shop. Not every detail of what Marcus had done and what it had cost him to look at directly. Enough that Raymond understood who Zora was and why they were walking through that door. Inside, the shop smelled of cedar and warm fabric, and something faintly floral from a small candle burning near the register. Raymond moved through it the way he moved through things he respected, without rushing, touching nothing, just looking. He examined the finished pieces displayed in the front window. He studied the organization of the boat wall. He paused at the work table and looked at the project laid out there, a half-finished suit jacket in deep navy, its lining pinned and basted. And something in his face changed slightly, the way faces change when something familiar surfaces unexpectedly. His gaze drifted to the counter. A framed photograph sat near the register. A younger Zora, maybe 20, standing beside an elderly woman with close-cropped white hair and deep brown skin and an expression of settled, specific warmth, the kind of warmth that comes from a person who has spent decades giving away and found it never ran out. The older woman's hand rested on Zora's shoulder like something that had always belonged there. Raymond went very still. Marcus watched him. Raymond's voice when he spoke was quieter than usual, lower, the way voices go when something old rises faster than composure can hold it. He said a name Marcus did not recognize. Rosa. Marcus looked at him. Raymond did not look away from the photograph. He stood in front of it for a long moment, and when he finally spoke again, he said something he had never said before, not to Marcus, not to anyone, as far as Marcus knew. He told him about a winter, years ago, not long after Marcus's mother had left and Raymond had found himself raising 2 children alone on a salary that did not stretch far enough and a pride that would not let him say so out loud. A stretch of weeks that he did not talk about because there was nothing useful in talking about it. One afternoon he had been walking back from a second job interview that had not gone the way he needed it to go, and something in him had simply given out. Not dramatically, not in any way that drew attention. Just a man sitting down on a bench on a sidewalk because his legs had decided they were done and his chest was too full of something he could not name to keep moving forward. A woman came out of the shop behind him. She did not call for help and leave. She brought him inside. She made him sit. She gave him something warm to eat and something warm to drink, and she sat across from him and talked to him the way people talk when they are not performing kindness but simply practicing it, as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world to bring a stranger in from the cold and treat him like he mattered. She would not take anything in return. When he finally stood to go, steadier than he had been in weeks, she pressed something into his hands, a scarf, carefully folded, deep burgundy, and she told him something he had not forgotten in 35 years. Kindness always comes back around. Her name, he said, was Rosa Bloom, and the shop had been called Stitch and Grace. Raymond's voice had gone quiet by the end of it. He was still looking at the photograph. Marcus turned toward the counter. Zora was standing a few feet away. She had heard all of it. She was not surprised. She looked like someone who had been carrying a long-suspected thing quietly for a long time and had just felt the weight of it confirm itself. Subscribe to Echoed Truth Stories right now, because what Zora says next has been waiting 35 years to arrive. Zora did not speak immediately. She looked at the photograph on the counter for a moment. The way you look at something you looked at 10,000 times and are now seeing for the first time from a different angle. Then she looked at Raymond. She told him that her grandmother had spoken about that afternoon more than once over the years. Not often, not in a way that sought recognition. The way people mentioned things that meant something to them quietly and continue to mean something without needing an audience. She said there was a man she found sitting outside on a winter afternoon who looked like someone carrying more than a person ought to carry alone. She brought him in. She said she never knew what became of him. She wondered sometimes. Raymond was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She saved my life that afternoon. Not in the way you saved mine," he said. He glanced at Marcus and then back at Zora, but in the way that counts just as much. She gave me enough to keep going. And I did. Zora straightened the pin on the jacket for him beside her. Something to do with her hands. When I heard your name at the hospital, she said to Raymond, I wasn't certain. The name alone wasn't enough. But something in me recognized the situation. A man who needed something specific, something rare, and had people around him who loved him and couldn't give it to him themselves. She paused. My grandmother always said that kindness doesn't disappear. It settles somewhere and waits. I thought, if there was even a chance this was the same family, then what I could give wasn't charity. It was just returning something that had already been given a long time ago. She said it plainly and without decoration. The way people speak when they have been certain of something for long enough that they no longer need anyone to agree with them. Raymond stepped forward. He placed both hands over hers where they rested on the counter. The gesture was simple and unhurried. It did not ask for anything. It did not explain itself. It was a gesture of a man who had spent 35 years being grateful to someone he could not find, finally having somewhere to put it. "Your grandmother gave me my footing back," he said. "Everything I built after that afternoon, everything Marcus built, it started there, on that bench, because she would not walk past." Zora's eyes were bright, but she did not look away. She said she would have said she was just doing what was in front of her to do. Raymond smiled, the kind of smile that lives close to grief and is not diminished by it. "I know," he said. "That's the kind of person who changes things." Marcus stood back from all of it and did not speak. He had built his career on being present in every room in the most decisive way possible, on being the person who moved things, who resolved things, who made the call and absorbed the consequence and kept moving forward. He was good at it. He had always been good at it. But what was happening inside this small shop right now was not something he had made happen. It was something that had been moving toward this moment for 35 years, beneath the surface of every decision and every consequence and every twist of circumstance, and it had arrived here entirely on its own. He thought about what he had almost done to this building. He thought about the garments on the floor and the spools rolling into the corners and Zora on her knees, smoothing each piece before setting it aside. Not because someone was watching, not because it made strategic sense, but because that was who she was. Because some people's character is not a performance they turn on and off. It is simply how they move through the world, whether anyone is paying attention or not. He thought about what it would mean to build that way. Not a tower, not a brand, something in another person. The kind of thing that does not go on a lobby wall or get photographed from across a river, but that keeps a man on his feet on a winter afternoon and travels forward through time in ways no one can predict and arrives, eventually, 35 years later, in the form of a daughter's granddaughter walking into a hospital for a stranger. He did not say any of this out loud. He was still learning how. In the weeks after the opening, something happened that no marketing strategy had anticipated and no leasing plan had accounted for. Stitch and Grace became the most visited destination in Delaney Square, not because of any campaign, not because of placement or signage, or any of the mechanisms Marcus understood how to deploy, because people walked past the front window and slowed down, because they came inside and felt something they did not feel in the towers on either side, something that had age and intention, and the particular warmth of a place that had not been built for this moment, but had simply survived long enough to be here for it. Word moved the way word moves when it is attached to something real. New clients came. Old clients returned. People brought their mothers and their daughters and their suits in need of mending and their dresses in need of taking in. The shop was busier than it had ever been. Zora hired 2 additional seamstresses by the end of November. Marcus commissioned a small plaque, installed discreetly on the exterior brick beside the front door, at Zora's eventual and quiet agreement. No development branding. No corporate language. Nothing that pointed back to him or to Delaney Square or to the project that had almost taken this building from the world. Just 3 words and a name. For Rosa Bloom. He never gave an interview about it. He never brought it up in a meeting or included it in any company materials. If journalists asked about the design choice, the plaza curving around the smallest building on the block, he said only that some things are more valuable than square footage. Most of them printed that and moved on. A few of them understood what he meant. Outside, through the front window of Stitch and Grace, the courtyard of Delaney Square moved to the rhythms of a new day. People crossed the wide stone walkway, passed the fountain, stopped at the restaurant windows, came and went through the tall glass doors of the towers on either side. All of it exactly as Marcus had designed across 6 years and thousands of decisions. And at the center of it, a green awning, a hand-lettered sign, a door propped open to the morning air. The smallest building on the block, the one that had refused to move, the one that had been built not with capital or ambition or a particular hunger that drives men to reshape skylines, but with 40 years of a woman's careful hands and conviction that what you give away does not disappear, that it settles somewhere and waits and finds its way back to you in forms you could not have predicted and would not have thought to ask for. Some things are built with money and vision and the will to outwork every person in the room. And some things are built with a scarf pressed into a stranger's hands on a winter afternoon and 3 words spoken at a door. Both can leave a mark on a city. Only one of them leaves a mark on a life. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that kindness travels further than we think and lands exactly where it's supposed to. And if you are new here, you belong here. Subscribe to Echoed True Stories. More stories like this one are already waiting for you.